Part 1. Este. Chapter 1. There were many ways a child could turn up in the baby market of Doblimi. Many children, of course, were genuine orphans, though now that wars had ended with McCall's peace, orphanhood was a social position much less often achieved. Others had been sold by desperate parents who had to have money, or who had to have a child out of their way and hadn't had the hearts for murder. More were bastards from worlds and nations where religion or custom forbade birth control, and others slipped in through the cracks. Ansett was one of these when a seeker from the Songhouse found him. He had been kidnapped, and the kidnappers had panicked, opting for the quick profit from the baby trade instead of the much riskier business of arranging for ransom and exchange. Who were his parents? They were probably wealthy, or their child wouldn't have been worth kidnapping. They were white, because Ansett was extremely fair-skinned and blonde, but there were trillions of people answering to that description, and no government agency was quite so foolish as to assume the responsibility of returning him to his family. So Ansett, whose age was unknowable, but who couldn't be more than 3 years old, was one of a batch of a dozen children that the seeker brought back to 2. All the children had responded well to a few simple tests: pitch recognition, melody repetition, and emotional response. Well enough, in fact, to be considered potential musical prodigies. And the Songhouse had bought— No, people are not bought in the baby market. The Songhouse had adopted them all. Whether they became songbirds, or mere singers, masters or teachers, or even if they did not work out musically at all, the Songhouse raised them, provided for them, cared about them for life. In loco parentis, said the law. The Songhouse was mother, father, nurse, siblings, offspring, and, until the children reached a certain level of sophistication, God. New, sang 100 young children in the common room, and Ansett and his fellow marketed children were ushered in. Ansett did not stand out from the others. True, he was terrified, but so were the rest. And while his Nordic skin and hair put him at the extreme end of the racial spectrum, such things were studiously ignored, and no one ridiculed it for it, any more than they would have ridiculed an albino. Routinely he was introduced to the other children. Routinely all forgot his name as soon as they heard it. Routinely they sang a welcome, whose tone and melody were so confused that it did nothing to allay Ansett's fear. Routinely Ansett was assigned to Rook, a 5-year-old who knew the ropes. "You can sleep by me tonight," Rook said, and Ansett dumbly nodded. "I'm older," Rook said. "In maybe a few months, or sometime soon anyway, I get a stall." This meant nothing to Ansett. "Anyway, don't piss in your bed, because we never get the same one 2 nights in a row." Ansett's 3-year-old pride was enough to take umbrage at this. "Don't piss in bed." But he didn't sound angry, just afraid. "Good. Some of them are so scared they do." It was near bedtime. New children were always brought in near bedtime. Ansett asked no questions. When he saw that other children were undressing, he too undressed. When he saw that they found nightgowns under their blankets, he too found a nightgown and put it on, though he was clumsy at it. Rook tried to help him, but Ansett shrugged off the offer. Rook looked momentarily hurt, then sang the love song to him. "I will never hurt you. I will always help you. If you are hungry, I'll give you my food. If you are frightened, I am your friend. I love you now, and love does not end." The words and concepts were beyond Ansett, but the tone of voice was not. Rook's embrace on his shoulder was even more clear, and Ansett leaned on Rook, though he still said nothing, and did not cry. "Toilet?" Rook asked. Ansett nodded, and Rook led him to a large room adjoining the common room, where water ran swiftly through trenches. It was there that he learned that Rook was a girl. "Don't stare," she said. "Nobody stares without permission." Again, Ansett did not understand the words, but the tone of voice was clear. He understood the tone of voice instinctively, as he always had. It was his greatest gift, to know emotions even better than the person feeling them. "How come you don't talk except when you're mad?" Rook asked him, as they lay down in adjoining beds, as 100 other children also lay down. It was now that Ansett's control broke. He shook his head, then turned away, buried his face under the blankets, and cried himself to sleep. He did not see the other children around him who looked at him with distaste. He did not know that Rook was humming a tune that meant, "Let be, let alone, let live." He did know, however, when Rook patted his back, and he knew that the gesture was kind. And this was why he never forgot his first night in the Songhouse, and why he could never feel anything but love for Rook, though he would soon far surpass her rather limited abilities. "Why do you let Rook hang around you so much when she isn't even a breeze?" asked a fellow student once, when Ansett was 6. Ansett did not answer in words. He answered with a song that made the questioner break control, much to his humiliation, and weep openly. No one else ever challenged Rook's claim on Ansett. He had no friends, not really, but his song for Rook was too powerful to challenge. Chapter 2. Ansett held on to 2 memories of his parents, though he did not know these dream people were his parents. They were White Lady and Giant Man, when he thought to put names to them at all. He never spoke of them to anyone, and he only thought of them when he had dreamed the dreams of them the night before. The first memory was of the White Lady, whimpering, lying on a bed with huge pillows. She was staring into nothingness, and did not see Ansett as he walked into the room. His step was unsure. He did not know if she would be angry that he had come in, but her soft, whipped cries drew him on, for it was a sound he could not resist, and he came and stood by the bed where she rested her head on her arm. He reached out and patted her arm. Even in the dream, the skin felt hot and fevered. She looked at him, and her eyes were deep in tears. Ansett reached to the eyes, touched the brow, let his tiny fingers slide down, closing the eyes, caressing the lids so gently that the White Lady did not recoil. Instead she sighed, and he caressed all her face as her whimpers softened into gentle humming. It was then that the dream went awry, ending in odd ways. Always Giant Man came in. But what he did was a mystery of rumbling voice, embraces, shouts. Sometimes he also lay on the bed with White Lady. Sometimes he picked up Ansett and took him on strange adventures that ended in waking. Sometimes the White Lady kissed him goodbye. Sometimes she did not notice him once the Giant Man came into the room. But the dream always began the same, and the part that never changed was memory. The other memory was of the moment of kidnapping. Ansett was in a very large place, with a distant roof that was painted with strange animals and distorted people. Loud music came from a lighted place, where everyone was always moving. Then there was a deafening noise, and the place became all light and noise and conversation, and White Lady and Giant Man walked among the crowd. There was pushing and jostling, and someone stepped between White Lady and Ansett, breaking their handhold. White Lady turned to the stranger, but at the same moment Ansett felt a powerful hand grip his. He was pulled away, bumping harshly through the crowd. Then the hand pulled him up, hurting his arm, and for a moment, lifted above the heads of the crowds, Ansett saw White Lady and Giant Man for the last time, both of them pushing through the crowds, their faces fearful, their mouths open to cry out. But Ansett could never remember hearing them, for a blast of hot air struck him, and a door closed, and he was outside in a blazing hot night, and then he always woke up trembling, but not crying, because he could hear a voice saying, "Quiet, quiet, quiet," in tones that meant fear, and falling, and fire, and shame. "You do not cry," said the teacher, a man with a voice that was more comforting than sunlight. Ansett shook his head. "Sometimes," he said. "Before," answered the teacher, "but now you will learn control. When you cry, you waste your songs. You burn up your songs. You drown your songs." "Songs?" asked Ansett. "You are a little pot full of songs," said the teacher, "and when you cry, the pot breaks, and all the songs spill out ugly. Control means keeping the songs in the pot, and letting them out one at a time." Ansett knew pots. Food came from a pot. He thought of songs as food then, besides knowing they were music. "Do you know any songs?" asked the teacher. Ansett shook his head. "Not any? Not any songs at all?" Ansett looked down. "Ansett, songs. Just a song that has no words, but you just sing. Like this. Ah." And the teacher sang a short stretch of melody that spoke to Ansett and said, "Trust, trust, trust." Ansett smiled. He sang the same melody back to the teacher. For a moment the teacher smiled, then looked startled. Then he reached out with wondering eyes and touched Ansett's hair. The gesture was so kind. And so Ansett sang the love song to the teacher. Not the words, because he had no memory for words yet, but he sang the melody as Rook had sung it to him, and the teacher wept. It was Anset's first lesson, on his first day at the songhouse, and the teacher wept. He did not understand until later that this meant that the teacher had lost control and would be ashamed for weeks until Anset's gifts were more fully appreciated. He only knew that when he sang the love song, he was understood. Child out of their way and hadn't had the hearts for murder. More were bastards from worlds and nations where religion or custom forbade birth control, and others slipped in through the cracks. Anset was one of these when a seeker from the songhouse found him. Part 1. Este. Chapter 1. There were many ways a child could turn up in the baby market of Doblimi. Kidnapping. They were white, because Anset was extremely fair-skinned and blonde, but there were trillions of people answering to that description, and no government agency was quite so foolish as to assume the responsibility of returning him to his family. So Anset, he had been kidnapped, and the kidnappers had panicked, opting for the quick profit from the baby trade instead of the much riskier business of arranging for ransom and exchange. Who were his parents? They were probably wealthy, or their child wouldn't have been worth. Many children, of course, were genuine orphans. Though now that wars had ended with McCall's peace, orphanhood was a social position much less often achieved. Others had been sold by desperate parents who had to have money, or who had to have